Welcome to this episode of Mayor Brown's Quick Insights on Congressional Investigations with Michael Levy and Andrew Olmem, our 5-minute perspectives for in-house counsel and government affairs executives on the most important and challenging issues surrounding congressional investigations. I'm Michael Levy, a white-collar defense lawyer at Mayor Brown. My partner, Andrew Olmem, is the former Republican chief counsel on the Senate Banking Committee. Today, we're excited to address a question that was submitted by one of our viewers. Andrew, can Congress investigate the same matter that a regulator is also investigating?
Well, first, great question, because the answer is yes, and they often do investigate the same matter. So to understand how this can happen, let's go back and remember Constitutional Law 101, which is that we have both the executive branch agencies and Congress. They are separate entities, and they have their own constitutional authorities, and they get to decide how to exercise those authorities. As a result, they can use them to investigate the same subject. Now, however, as we've mentioned before in prior episodes, they do have different constitutional authorities. The executive branch has the exclusive authority to bring enforcement and prosecutorial actions. In contrast, Congress must have a legislative purpose for its any investigation that it conducts. It cannot bring, and the Supreme Court is actually pretty clear about this, hearings designed to be hearings for enforcement actions or prosecutorial hearings. So that's the one area where Congress can't go. However,
they can feel that way.
Yeah, they can feel it. It looks like it, and that's why it's often mistaken, but it's not necessarily the case. Congress just needs to be focused on whether or not legislation may be needed to address a particular topic. Now, that's pretty broad, and given that agencies are enforcing statutes that Congress already passed, effectively it's the same material. So I'll write again with different angles. Now, it's also important to note the other dynamic that happens because of our constitutional system is that the actions of one often lead to actions by the other. There's a dynamic content to this, which is that if you have an agency, for example, that announces a very kind of high-profile, significant enforcement action, that will often prompt Congress to conduct its own investigation of that particular matter. In contrast, you can have a situation where Congress conducts an investigation that uncovers potential regulatory violations that the agencies then see and then pick up and start their own investigation for an enforcement action. So it's a very dynamic process. For companies, too, and individuals that find themselves the subject of both a regulatory and a congressional investigation, they are in a really particularly challenging position. And trying to manage those investigations simultaneously creates a lot of potential for missteps and errors, because as we talked before, Congress and executive agencies conduct investigations with slightly different rules, different constitutional privileges and scopes, and media strategies can be very different on how you handle one of these. So this is one of the more complex areas one can find themselves in. And I know, Michael, you have represented several clients who had this been in this situation in the past. I'm kind of curious to hear from you, from your perspective, is how did you think about managing those representations to protect your client's interests when you knew that you had to not only deal with an enforcement action, but also a congressional investigation at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you need to look at it holistically, and you need to look at the client's overall best interest. And you can add on top of that in some investigations, criminal investigations, as well as regulatory investigations, as well as congressional investigations. And sometimes you can have multiple regulators who have some level of overlapping, jurisdiction, also looking at the same thing, all in the swarm of a media spotlight, all of which is going to just, ratchet up the pressure on everybody to be as aggressive seeming as they possibly can be. At the same time, oftentimes you actually have fights over who gets the witness first. And navigating all of that is difficult. So while you might have a particular strategy that would be the right strategy for a congressional or SEC or other investigating entity on a regulatory side, or for, private class actions or a criminal investigation, you have to look at the collateral effect of whatever it is that you're doing. And so sometimes the strategy that might be the perfect strategy for one of the investigations really hurts you in another one. You have to try to find a strategy that improves the client's overall outcome. That's reputational, it's criminal, obviously hugely important, but also, and particularly for companies that are in highly regulated industries, you really can't sacrifice the regulator to satisfy Congress, because you're going to be with that regulator all the time. But you also can't satisfy the regulator at the expense of Congress, because Congress is going to govern the regulator.
Yeah, I was just going to say, upsetting Congress is going to, if the regulator upsets the Congress on the way it handles the enforcement action or other matter, is very likely to generate a negative outcome for the regulator.
Right. But you also, and we've talked about this in other episodes, there are times you just need to say no. There are times that you just need to push back. And there are times when some of the strategy can involve playing one against the other a little bit. And sometimes that can be effective. Sometimes it can be a huge disaster. A lot depends on how you do it all. But obviously, way more than we can discuss in 5 minutes, or approximately 5 minutes. But we do want to thank you for joining us for this episode. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's great that this episode's question came from a viewer. We'd love to hear and answer more questions if you've got them. So please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is at the end of the video. Thanks.